Charlie Chaplin, when we think of him, and we have people here from all different generations, but even those who know him, mostly what's known about him is the man with the funny costume and the funny walk, and you wouldn't know necessarily much more about him. But the truth is that Charlie's work contains much more than that, and living with his work has deeply enriched my life over the last few years, and I'm convinced it can do the same for you. And I'll share with you what I discovered in his work tonight. Now, Charlie grew up in East London, a very poor area at the time, at the end of the 19th century. And Charlie came from a family of performers. Both his mother and his father were theatre performers. This was the days of the music halls in England, when it was very popular to go to live performances every night. All kinds of people in there, maybe drunk and throw money on the stage. Charlie's father wasn't involved in his life, and Charlie's mother eventually turned a bit insane and had to committed to an asylum. And when that happened, Charlie and his older brother Sidney were taken to a workhouse, which was what I did at the time to people who would like parents to take care of them. This experience will later be featured in Charlie's own films. Now, Charlie and his brother looked out for each other throughout their lives. His brother Sidney and him were together in business till the last day. So his brother Sidney went on to take a job at the Fred Carnot Theatre Company, which was a very popular group at the time in England, who do vaudeville songs and gags. And he got a job for his younger brother Charlie, who, though he was very small at the time, not far over the age of 10, they convinced Fred Carnot to hire him, and he became a dancer, and he participated. He got a very good training there, because they had good technique. And one of the interesting things in the Fred Carnot Theatre Company is that they combined their comedy acts with very romantic music in the background as a counterpoint, as a contrast to what they do on stage. And Charlie took that with him for the rest of his life. Now, you may be surprised to hear that Charlie Chaplin is considered a great composer of music. Charlie composed all of the music for his own films. Many of them even became songs with lyrics, and many of them is just instrumental music that you hear throughout his films. But the thing is that Charlie didn't know how to write notes. Charlie didn't know how to read notes. Charlie also didn't know very well how to play an instrument, though he liked to play around with as many instruments as he can. He never had the time or whatever else it was to commit himself to practicing music properly, but nevertheless he was convinced that only he must compose his music for his own films. How did he do that? He used to take composers and sit down with them in a room, and for sessions which could take up to 6 hours, where he would walk around the room, mumble and hum whatever he can, and until he found the melody in his head that he was looking for. And then he would ask the composer who was working with him to write that down, to work that out. And they would start working with it. But if they made it too complex, which was a trend at the time, Charlie would stop them and say, no, you need to hear the melody clearly, because that's what Charlie's style was. He was talking directly to people, and he needed clear melodies. Didn't allow them to dabble too much with it. And composers came and they were fired when they couldn't take it anymore, because he would sit with them for weeks and weeks, and every day from 9 till 9, work with them, hum, and to get them desperately to write what he conceived in his head. And many of them went crazy, couldn't take it anymore. But many of them stuck, and in their beautiful autobiographies you can read about the process of this marvelous composer who wrote marvelous music that you will be hearing tonight, but could never write a single note. And he did it all through the cooperation that he had. But he had an artistic vision. Charlie is a man who trusted himself when it came to any aspect of his life. And he always met opposition, as I'll be telling you tonight, in any field that he was involved in. But he always was convinced in his inner voice that he feels, and he devoted his life to hours and hours of meditation to sit and find the melody that he was sure he has within him, or the picture that he was sure that he has within him. And for me, when I got to know Charlie Chaplin's works, I saw his wonderful films, which are not just comedic works, but romantic works and real artistic visions. So I became so curious about him. And I've been up nights and nights reading every bit of information I can about him. Even last night I was up all night reading a new book I discovered about him, because he fascinates me as a person, and he inspires me to take every piece of energy you have, every vision you have, and work it out to the most you can, not rely on any conventions to bring you there. Now Charlie, when he was working with the Fred Carnell Theatre in England, eventually they were a very popular theatre group, so they were invited to the US in the beginning of the 20th century, and Charlie was one of the members who was invited with them to perform in the US. And during his tour he was noticed by some Hollywood managers who invited him to stay and become part of what was at the time the Keystone film company. Charlie decided to stay, and I think he was under the age of 20 still at the time, and he got a job in Hollywood, became one of the highest paid actors. He joined the Keystone company led by Max Sennett, and at the time you had the black and white comedies, 20-minute videos usually, which always end in a cop chase. And Charlie came into this. Now what does Charlie do to it? He brought something new, something that I didn't have in those films before, and that was character. He came in and developed a character which we come to know later as the tramp character, the gentleman tramp. And the character developed. You can see in the films between 1915 when he joined them till 1920 when he went away on his own, that his character develops more and more. And he starts off with slight ideas and develops them slowly. Now what happens is that as he developed his character more and more, he had a stronger vision for what he wanted from his character. And what happens usually is that you run into trouble with the people who hire you, because he wanted to direct his own films, he wanted to write his own films, he wanted to act his own films, but they didn't allow him to do that. They knew what has to be done, as people always know best. And if he didn't want to produce, they ran into trouble with them. So Charlie went ahead and created the United Artists group, which it exists till today. It was the very first production company in Hollywood to be controlled by the artists themselves. But let's say, for example, if you saw the recent beautiful movie that came out, Stan and Ollie, about Laurel and Hardy, where you see how much they struggled their whole lives because they didn't have any rights to the copyrights of their films, because they were employed. And now Charlie avoided that early on by going out and developing his own company. Now the moment he founded his own company, he could now write, direct and do everything as he pleased. Now a big change happened. The moment he did that, he no longer produced little 20-minute videos of comedy shtick. Now he produced videos of at least an hour, sometimes two, which tell a whole story, which bring you a character which is a tramp of the streets, but nevertheless a gentleman. He may pick up cigarette butts from the street as his cigarettes, but he will still put them in a box. And he developed a character with romantic aspirations, always hopeful, always getting involved in things, an adventurous character. And I'll be showing you some of those films tonight. Those are the films in which he developed his character and shared with us a wonderful experience that you can see on screen. I'll start straight away with the first of those movies that he created, The Kid. Now in The Kid, you can see reflected a lot of what he was obviously very familiar with from his own childhood as a poor little boy raised without parents. And what fascinates me about it is how much he must have loved and be able to laugh at himself during his own experience in order to create a whole film based on enjoying the life of such a child. Charlie found a wonderful kid to act in his film, Jackie Cogan. And I'll start straight ahead. Now I'll perform with them now the music that he wrote for the scene while the scene is playing. We'll perform you the action music that Charlie himself wrote for this.
Should I close the kitchen?
You don't need the kitchen.
We'll see how they see us.
I think we'll close it. If you need more light.
Can I ask a question, Laurie?
Sure.
I read somewhere along the way that there was a question mark about whether Charlie was actually born to Jewish parents.
Yes, throughout his life, Charlie was thought to be Jewish, and until now, many people always say to me, you know Charlie Chaplin? Oh, he was Jewish, right? Now, Charlie addresses in the autobiography he was not Jewish, but the reasons why he was thought of as Jewish is a fewfold. First of all, he grew up in an area which was very Jewish at the time. I don't know if there's any Jews in East London now, but at the time it was a very Jewish area. Second of all, there never was a birth certificate for Charlie. And third of all, the Nazis had a whole dispute with him, and he was commonly thought to identify so much with the Jews that he must be Jewish himself. And also, Charlie wrote in his autobiography that he never wanted to come out and say I'm not Jewish, because his older brother Sidney was of a different father, and his older brother Sidney's father was Jewish, so he didn't want to come out in public and say I'm not Jewish, you know, so his brother shouldn't feel offended. No.
They understood his mother was Jewish.
She was. They say that it's clear that she wasn't Jewish. I mean, of her, they know who she was. So this film, The Kid, opens up with a scene where you see a mother who just gave birth, but she's so poor that she doesn't think she can raise a child. And she decides to drop the kid in a car next to a rich family's house so that they will raise the kid. But little does she know that in a few minutes later, a few burglars come and steal the car. And they find the kid in the car, and they don't know what to do, so they drop it on the side of the street. And you'll see what happens next.
You might get hit by the slide on the first row. It's fine, I have your chance.
It's not the Three Stooges.
Okay, we're good. Let's start. 1, 2, 1. Are we playing with the music on?
No, it's meant to be without.
Wait, he's fixing it?
Closer, I cannot see.
Okay.
Can you start it again?
I cannot see in the back.
Move your chair up a little. You can move
No,
over
that's
then.
fine.
No, but you won't see well.
It's fine.
Move over.
She can have that chair.
Wait. You have to move over. Because you're knocking the piano. Joe, just go forward.
That's fine.
Move forward again. Thank you. That's it. You can sit.
No, you sit and you sit. Thank you very much.
So then, after Charlie took in the child, here's one of the most characteristic things about Charlie's character, which you see throughout his films. He presents a character who is a tramp on the street. But nevertheless, the moment any chance is given to him, any responsibility, he jumps into it like nothing else. And it's one of the biggest lessons he taught me. He jumps into it fully, as if nothing else. And the saying that people say life happens while you're busy making other plans. He is, to me, the ultimate character to embrace that perception that it's not about what you planned before, but rather about what's presented to you and you have to deal with now. So Charlie takes on the child and he becomes the most committed father. And now in the next clip, which will also play with the music he wrote for it, you'll see the little child having become a little Charlie himself. So after Charlie took on the child, at some point the child becomes sick and they need to call a doctor. And the doctor comes and asks Charlie if he's the child, if he's the father of the child, and Charlie says, well, practically, but the doctor finds out that it's not his real father and doesn't understand what's going on here. So he says, I'll have to report this, and he needs the proper care and attention. Now, in the next film, you see when the proper care and attention arrives. This one we need sound for because we won't play along. In this one, Charlie composed a beautiful theme, a musical theme, which keeps running, and what they call modulation music, keeps switching to different places which have the same theme and goes up and builds as the drama of the scene builds as well.
Forgive me, that's Jackie Gleason, yes?
Hogan. There's a beautiful account of how Charlie worked with the child, because the child was only 3 or 4 years old at the time, and how he got him to act so well, but he was an incredible actor. There's more to the film, of course. If you see it at home, you can see the other part, the incredible acting of the child with Charlie together. This is, I was thinking, amongst Charlie Chaplin's fans, this is a very intimate film, because there's not too many actors on stage. It's just Charlie and the kid for most of it, and it remains forever a very special work, and not least because this was the first film in which Charlie showed us what he wanted to do with his character. Up till that point, it was the usual comedic gags, and from this point onwards, it was a different story. Now, what in the next film you're going to see, this is the circus. And in that film, Charlie gets caught up in a circus. The tramp character gets caught up in a circus. Now, Charlie at the time was after he's reached big success, and he describes in his autobiography how he's feeling so lonely, and he's walking around the streets of New York. Here he is, a very young, British child in his 20s, reached huge success, worked so hard, but he feels so alone from the world, and he's had a hard time feeling funny anymore. And then he wrote a film playing with the theme of can you be funny intentionally or not, and how people put in the right circumstances end up being very funny. And so you can show the next clip, which you see how he gets involved with the circus. So the theater manager who was struggling with the struggling circus sees that this character gets so much love, so decides to hire Charlie and use him as a comedian for a circus. And here's how they try to train him. Okay, so Charlie the tramp was struggling with the situation that on the one hand he gets offered a job, on the other hand he doesn't know how to be funny intentionally. But at the same time, while he was hanging around on set, he notices there's a girl who is being very mistreated. She doesn't get food properly, and he discovers that she's the daughter of the theater, of the circus manager, director, founder, and he makes her perform in the show, but he doesn't treat her very well. He doesn't give her money, he doesn't give her food properly. Charlie tries to help her, develops a kinship for her. And for this, Charlie composed a beautiful, beautiful song called Swing Little Girl, which he actually wrote lyrics for as well. All the music you've heard so far is all written by Charlie. And that he took from the Fred Carner Theatre Company where he worked as a young child, where he learned that everyone was telling him at the time, you should compose funny music for your funny films. But he argued that he learned from them that it's better to have romantic music as a contrast to what's going on screen and to combine it. So all that you saw, the beautiful words, is all composed specially by him for the films. And this one he composed a beautiful, beautiful song, Swing Little Girl, which we're going to perform with the singer together. And this one without sound, I have a film for it.
Hi. I'm Ronnie. Nice to meet you all.
Ronnie is a wonderful, wonderful singer, and we've been singing together for a while. Swing, little girl, swing high to the sky, and don't ever look at the ground. If you're looking for rainbows, look up to the sky. You'll never find rainbows if you're looking down. Life may be dreary, but never the same. Someday it's sunshine, someday it's rain. Swing, little girl, swing high to the sky, and don't ever look to the ground. If you're looking for rainbows, look up to the sky, but never, no, never look down. Yeah, it wasn't timed well. Okay. So Charlie, he was fired from the job as a comedian, but nevertheless gets involved with the circus again, as you'll see in the following clip, with sound this time. One before.
Oh, the one before was Swing Little Girl, I think.
No.
No, like they were. No, it's not.
This was
one?
Yeah.
Yeah, they went in order.
That's the one.
That was sweet.
Okay,
That's
so
what
we
we
need this one. You need with sound.
Right.
Wait, so you didn't see the correct
No.
clip for Swing Little
No.
Girl?
No.
What did it
That was good.
He was trying to say.
You didn't see us swinging on the swing?
No.
We'll have to do it again.
They have to go back to the clip before.
Okay. No,
What's with that clip? That clip works?
it was on. It was switched.
Really?
Okay.
Was wondering what happened.
She's
Swing, little girl, swing high to the sky, and don't ever look at the ground. If you're looking for rainbows, look up to the sky. You will never find rainbows if you're looking down. Life may be dreary, but never the same. Someday it's sunshine, someday it's rain.
Swing, little bird, swing high to the sky, and don't ever look to the ground. If you're looking for rainbows, look up to the sky, but never, no, never look
I think something's going on with the playlist there. Okay, so this is the next clip where you see how he gets involved again with the circus even after being fired.
I think this is the one we saw.
Right.
The wonderful Charlie Chaplin. Charlie, in all his films, he plays a tramp who is on the streets and has no prospects, and through certain circumstances he comes into something and he gets involved. But Charlie didn't like ending with happy endings. He never ended his movie. He always ended his movies on a hopeful note, but never liked to give there, and they lived happily ever after. In one of the films where he worked tirelessly the whole film to be together with a certain girl, so originally the last scene was a kiss between them, but then he edited it out and published it without that, because he always loved leaving it as an adventure, as you don't know what comes next. Because it was also ruined a bit. Think about it. If the whole point of the film was to show how a tramp becomes not a tramp anymore, then it's as if everything was a waste until you become like everybody else. So he wanted to maintain that he doesn't change. And one of the beautiful examples of that you can see in this film. Now at the end of the whole story with the circus, a very complicated relationship between him and the circus manager, where they convince the manager to let him join them and get a job and travel with them further on. And as they're about to leave, everybody else is leaving, they're thinking he's going to jump on the train. But he decides just to stay. He doesn't jump on the train and just stays, even though he has a prospect for a job. He sits down for a minute. You see the flag of the circus, a ripped up flag left. There's nothing left but a cloud of dust from the whole circus. He sits there for a few seconds, kicks up his leg, starts walking off as if off to the next adventure. Now we're talking here. This is at the end of the 1920s, and then the 1930s came, and sound films were created, as they called them at the time, the talkies. So until that point, I don't know if you know how fascinating film music was at the time. So nowadays you can imagine any film we know, what would it look like without music? You can't imagine. And in those days, what did they do? They didn't have yet the built-in speakers because the films didn't have sound. So they had live musicians at the theater performing music for the film. In many cases, you could have people who could just play random things not connected to the film altogether. And slowly there became a consciousness was born that the film needs to be in sync with the music. And they developed certain books that Disney printed of 100 pieces, let's say, which are suited, and they will be divided by colors. Red pages for wild scenes and violent scenes, and yellow pages for happy scenes, and so on. So the musician could choose on the spot. Eventually, it became even more precise when they wrote to the musicians specific numbers. Play Where's My Violets at that point. Play This Is a Dream at that point, and all the common songs of the time. Now, the moment that talking films came into the picture, that all changed, because now theaters built-in sound systems like we have today. And everybody told Charlie goodbye, you have to produce sound films from now on. But Charlie knew his tramp character, that he can't speak. His character was very universal. It spoke to the whole world, and that's one problem. If you do it in a specific language, you kill it off. But more than that, his character is like a dance. It's like a piece of poetry. It says so much, and it needs the abstraction in order to do that. If you put in the words, it will be too limited. And Charlie insisted, against everybody's advice, to continue producing silent films. And I'm so glad that he did, because the next film you will see is absolutely his greatest films. As I'll explain you why. Charlie himself wrote that this is absolutely his greatest film. It's called City Lights. And now Charlie took advantage of the new availability of sound, because he said, now I can be in absolute control of my music. So all the music you heard until now, Charlie himself composed for those films, but years later in Switzerland. At the time when the movies were published, he couldn't produce music for it because it didn't exist the technology for it yet. But this was the first film where he could absolutely put in the full music as he gave out the film. In this film, you see the tramp character matured as never before. He's walking the streets without any agenda, any ambition, not chasing things as he always was before. You see him as if he's so open, so fragile, so vulnerable, and so desperately waiting for something from the world to come to him rather than him to chase after the world. See the next scene, this one with sound, and you'll see it. Charlie was a perfectionist, and Charlie could take over scenes up to 400 times if he felt it's not up to perfection. He could postpone release dates for 2 years if he wished, until it was to his satisfaction. Charlie preferred to work with actors and actresses who were not experienced, because, as he said, it takes so much time to make them unlearn what they wrongly learned. And he used to personally act out for his actors every move, every thing. You could have this sometimes this hidden behind the scenes clips. You can see where he acts out for them every little face motion they needed to produce. In this scene you just saw, took him, according to different accounts, according to most to his own account, I think 92 times until he got it right. And the actress who played in it, she couldn't take it and she quit. Eventually they hired her back. Virginia Cheryl is her name. And he chose her because she was the only actress who managed to pull off looking blind without being offensive, and give this gaze where your eyes are open but you're not looking anywhere in particular. And this scene, why did it take him also so long? Because he couldn't figure out why would a blind girl, first of all, she needed to be blind to want him to pay attention to him, but why would she pay attention to him nevertheless? And until he came up with a genius idea to have the tramp can't use a taxi because he can't afford it, but have the tramp escape from police through a taxi, close the door. She thinks the door of a taxi closed. At the time, you needed to be rich, so before get taxi, I guess. And so she assumes it's a rich person. She pulls out a flower to him, and he looks in confusion. Why would she offer me a flower? Can't she see I'm a homeless tramp? Why would she look at me at all? And he's confused until he realizes she keeps insisting. So he walks up, and the moment he realizes she's blind, his whole attitude changes. He raises his head. He suddenly doesn't feel so out of place, so inadequate in comparison to everybody else, and he suddenly hears the call of responsibility, of emotion, of life, without the preconceptions that he had before about himself and about others, and he gets involved. The music you heard here, I don't know if you paid attention, but this film is such a marvelous example of how he uses what we call musical phrasing to give over every emotion, where he stops the sentence at a questioning point and then continues it when it answers itself. Pay attention throughout this film how he uses music. Now, in this, the theme that he uses for the Flower Girl is a Spanish song of the time called La Violatera, which is about a girl who's selling violets. And this is a song we'll perform tonight in Spanish, the original version, because Ronnie happens to have Spanish heritage, so she understands some. Without a clip, this one.
Como aves precursoras de primavera, en Madrid aparecen las violeteras que pregonando parecen golondrinas que van viando. Llévelo usted, señorito, que no vale más que un real. Cómpreme usted este ramito, a lucirlo en el ojal. Son sus ojos alegres, su voz risueña, lo que se dice un tipo de madrileña, neta y castida, con sus ojos te cauterrida. Llévelo usted, señorito, que no vale más que un real. Cómpreme usted este ramito, pa' lucirlo en el ojal.
Charlie met a blind girl who sells violets, and she's convinced he's rich, and he keeps up the game. But how can he keep up the game? You'll see in the following clip, which we'll hear with sound.
This is during the Great Depression already.
This is what?
During the Great Depression, 1930, 31.
This is 1931, yes,
Yeah.
City Lights.
So it's during the Great Depression.
Yeah.
That's what I was gonna tell him.
So the man he just saved here from taking suicide turns out to be a very wealthy man who takes Charlie into his life and gives Charlie money to buy flowers from the flower girl. He allows him to use his car, and the blind girl feels she sees he has a car. So it keeps up the game that she thinks he's very rich. Now she wants to get cured from a blindness, and she finds out there's a doctor in Vienna who can cure blindness. She wants to go, and Charlie wants to give her the money. He wants to get it from the rich man, but the problem is the rich man only remembers him when he's drunk and suicidal. And the moment he's not, he just doesn't remember him at all. I don't know what Charlie went through, never to imagine that. And so Charlie has trouble, so he tries to take jobs, whatever he can, and he goes through a series of about 10 jobs you see in the film, which to earn her the money, so she's able to go. And here's a little clip from one of the jobs he takes. Eventually, he tries everything he can. He can't win the money in time. And the last night, he comes across his drunken friend who is drunken and suicidal again to his pleasure. And he gets from him the money that he needs to give to the girl. But the problem is that the moment the man wakes up from his drunkenness, he doesn't remember. And then the police thinks Charlie stole the money. Charlie manages to escape and give the money to the girl on time. And she goes off to the doctor, but Charlie's put into prison. For a long time, and he comes out eventually. He doesn't know what happened to the girl. And the next clip you'll see is when he finally came out of prison, and he's walking the streets like you see him hopeless as never before, at his lowest, absolute lowest point. To me, this is the most.
Very
You see the struggle of man and machine and the new times they were facing. And Charlie comes across a girl who is on the streets, barefoot, steals food to feed herself and her little siblings. And he's fascinated by her. And he sits down to have a chat with her. Charlie in this film, his character decides that he's happier. He ends up in prison, and he decides he's happier in prison than outside because it's so hard to get work, so hard to earn a living. So he doesn't want to leave prison even. eventually he does leave, and they end up creating a little life together. He finds a job, but they're going through many things. He's in prison, she's in prison. They're all changed because of little things. There's revolutions and protests going on. And at some point, at the end of the film, so they sit down on the side of the road after many unsuccessful attempts of getting a job, getting food and a house, and she breaks down and she can't take it anymore. And Charlie composed a beautiful, beautiful tune. You may have already recognized in this film we just heard, which became the famous song Smile, Smile though your heart is aching, smile even though it's breaking, which we'll perform for you now. Charlie composed a melody for it. The lyrics were added later on, those weren't his lyrics. Smile though your heart is aching, smile even though it's breaking. When there are clouds in the sky, you'll get by. If you smile through your fear and sorrow, smile and maybe tomorrow you'll see the sun come shining through for you.
Light up your face with gladness, hide every trace of sadness. Although a tear may be ever so near, that's the time you must keep on trying. Smile. What's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.
After this film, Charlie said goodbye to the tramp character we know and love, and he composed, from now on he produced films which were nothing to do with this character, and they were actually talking films. One of those films was A Countess from Hong Kong, which he wrote and directed, no clip for that one, and he composed a beautiful song for it, with lyrics as well, on which he worked tirelessly. There's many versions of, early versions of it. Eventually they published a song, a beautiful song, called This Is My Song, a song, a celebration of love. And he composed this for his film, A Countess of Hong Kong, which tells the story of a prostitute who smuggles herself into a ship to escape her country where she's supposed to be a prostitute, and a diplomat falls in love with her eventually. This is what he composed.
Why is my heart so light? Why are the stars so bright? Why is the sky so blue? Since the hour I met you, care not what the world may say. Without your love there is no day. So love, this is my song. Here is a song, a serenade to you.
And now for the last film that Charlie created. This is called Limelight, and this is autobiographical as nothing else, as well as inspired by a friend he witnessed. And Limelight tells the story of a comedian who was very popular in his young days, and then in his old days is struggling very much when he lost his touch with the audience. Limelight was a beloved film at the time, well received. Churchill wrote a letter to Charlie congratulating him on Limelight. In Limelight, you see Charlie talking like never before. You'll be surprised probably by his voice, those who haven't heard it before. And he gave way for his philosophical side in this film. He gave way for his arguments, for his theories on life. Now in Limelight, he plays himself the old comedian Calvert who's struggling, who comes into touch by accident with a girl who's a ballerina dancer who attempted to take suicide. He takes her into his home, and though neither of them is interested in any relationship with each other because they are at different points in their life, some sort of platonic relationship develops which turns into a love. And you see here Charlie encouraging her during a time she is feeling completely in despair about life, and you see him talking to her. For this we absolutely need sound.
Yes, life can be wonderful if you're not afraid of it. All it needs is courage, imagination, and a little dough. Now what's the matter?
I'll never dance again. I'm a cripple.
Pure hysteria, you've made yourself believe that.
Isn't true.
It is, otherwise you'd fight.
What is there to fight for?
Ah, you see, you admit it. What is there to fight for? Everything. Life itself, isn't that enough? To be lived, suffered, enjoyed. What is there to fight for? Life is a beautiful, magnificent thing. Even to a jellyfish. What is there to fight for? Besides, you have your art, your dancing.
Can't dance without legs.
I know a man without arms who can play a scherzo on a violin and does it all with his toes. The trouble is you won't fight. You've given in, continually dwelling on sickness and death. But there's something just as inevitable as death, and that's life. Life, life, life. Think of the power that's in the universe, moving the earth, growing the trees, and that's the same power within you, if you only have courage and the will to use it. Good night.
Now for the rest of the film you see them supporting each other. Even though he looks very strong at the moment, he also has his breakdown when he realizes that his career is gone. He's struggling with alcoholism, and she supports him during those times. And Charlie, he's the film star, but he started off in the music halls in England, and he always had in him the vaudeville songs and the acts, which he was very good at. And in this film he has a chance to show it, which all those years he didn't find where to put them in. He was writing them the whole time, lyrical songs for himself to perform. And here's, he had a chance, and you'll see one of his performances.
Pardon me, but have you a fly swatter?
I beg your pardon?
Now, if you come begging around here, I shall have to call the police.
I repeat, I beg your pardon.
I don't care what you repeat or what you've eaten.
I have eaten nothing.
You haven't? Oh dear. Here, stop and get yourself a sandwich.
Sir, I do
demand an apology.
An apology? I don't know you. Who are you? Who are your people? Are you in the social register?
My name happens to be Smith.
Never heard of them.
That shows you're asinine.
I still wore my overcoat. However, you interrupted me in the middle of my sonnet.
The middle of your what?
Not in the middle of my what? In the middle of my sonnet. My ode to a worm. Oh, worm, why do you turn into the earth from me? To spring, O worm, lift up your head, whichever end that be, and smile at the sun, and twine your naked form, and with your tail fling high the dirt, in ecstasies to spring, to spring, to spring.
Ridiculous. A worm smiling at the sun.
Why not?
In the first place, a worm can't smile.
How do you know? Did you ever appeal to a sense of humor?
Of course not.
Well, then.
But it doesn't make sense.
Why should poetry have to make sense? Don't you know there's such a thing as poetic license?
Just a moment, I've given you no license.
No, don't. This thing we're doing is so much bigger than ourselves. At this moment, I'm beginning to grasp the meaning of life. Oh, what a waste of energy. What is this urge that makes life go on and on and on?
You're right. What does it all mean? Where are we going?
You're going south, dear, and your hand's in my pocket. Not there.
How did you get there?
Pure magnetism, oh dear, pure magnetism.
Why are you antagonistic towards me?
Must we be serious?
You make it difficult for me to know you.
You should read my memoirs in the Police Gazette.
You're a funny man.
Why?
To talk about worms the way you do.
Why not? Even flies are romantic.
Flies?
Oh, yes. Haven't you ever seen them coming from the stable to the table, chasing each other over the knobs of sugar, and keeping their appointments in the butter? Surely you've read The Life of the Bee?
No, I haven't.
Well, the bee's behavior in the beehive is unbelievable.
Really?
Pardon
Goes
me.
on tight.
It certainly does.
I beg your pardon.
The dress, it goes on tight. Oh, dusty tonight, my dear. Oh, dusty. Turn around. Where do they keep you? On the top shelf or something? Who's that? No? Johnson powder. I know. Cornstarch.
Just think. All life motivated by love. How beautiful.
By no means beautiful.
Certainly is.
On the contrary, it's vile, wicked, awful. But it's wonderful.
I like you.
Really?
You're sensitive. You feel things.
Now, don't encourage me.
True. So few people have the capacity to feel.
Or the opportunity. I love it. Use it only for what you wish.
The greatest music that Charlie ever composed, some would say Smile, and some would say the next piece you'll hear, which we'll perform for you live. Now, at the end of the film, they convince the theater managers to give one more performance to this comedian who at the time wasn't popular anymore, and he has a grand performance, and she is the ballet dancer afterwards. And the clip you will see is at the end of the film after he has just performed the performance of his life, where he gets a wonderful applause. And the theme he composed for it, it's called nowadays Eternally, because they added lyrics to it, which we'll be singing for you, and together with Josh this time. Very nice. Remember to take off the sound, right?
shine when you were mine and mine alone.
I'll be loving you eternally. There'll be no one new, my dear, for me. In my heart it seems I've always known
The sun would shine when you were mine and mine alone.
I'll be loving you eternally.
There'll be no one new, my dear, for me. From the start within my heart it seems I've always known the sun would shine when you were mine and mine
So this was Charlie Chaplin for you. It's a privilege to share with you his wonderful work, which means so much to me. I'm sure it does so to you now as well. And I want you to thank Judge Clark for the clarinet. And Wendy Arietti for the soprano. And most importantly, Judy himself for organizing. He's not here anymore. And our trombonist Raviv, who escaped before he can have his thanks. We shall lose out of his
And our photography department.
Josh's brother helped us out on the studio.
And all of you for coming, thank you so much for this evening, for making it possible for us to have a wonderful evening. Next week, at the same place, 8 o'clock, we have a beautiful concert planned. Violinist and harpist from the Jerusalem Symphony will be here. And it really will be very, very special. If you'd like to join, just write to me on my WhatsApp. Okay? Everybody have a good week, safe week.
Have you done this before? Because it's still very fresh and amazing.
It's different every time.
Well, you keep reading. I know. I was hoping you'd keep doing this, because you should. Thanks, Judy. Amazing, amazing.
Sorry for the brother because we forgot the lyrics, so we didn't get to say it. No, but it's much more powerful.
Yeah, no, but you're right. Like I could feel it swelling. Like
It wasn't about it was mentally 10 times more. We forgot the last line. I don't know why.
it's okay. No, but the ending. Yeah, like, I saw the movie. I was like the corner of my eye. Like that last note hit like the end of like I used to go.
It's a shame.
I'm planning on moving to
Thank you so much.
Netherlands maybe Denmark.
If you have been to stick around,
We'll see. I'll have to put this away first.
Where do you come from? I'm from here. You're Israeli? Yeah. I was born here. Yeah. Because I don't have any work here.
You sound South African.
Australia.
Do you want the stuff?
Brilliant. It was really special. It moves. Right
So why do you have any questions? Why is it my house? We'll see why is it my house.
Thank you so much.
We did then we in the past, we haven't
Stay here.
you're still on the same point where you're connecting on somebody who
I become what I thought, you'd be busy all the time. So
Remember my very much. He's an autistic character.
Now I'm finishing with my connection.
After I wanted to go to reading the Israeli opera, but they don't use a lot of things here, and they don't play them.
Nothing specific. It's just his overall
And are they quite a few
One
you
handful
got
of stuff, which is probably
Oh, I'm not here, I'm sorry.
Very as long as you find.
Do you teach as well?
Yes.
Yeah, don't dwell in the limelight, please.
And your passion.
In Israel, 5 years now.
Actually, no, only for Charlie Chaplin.
Your English is
Yeah.
Self-taught.
What did you ask?
Self-taught.
Oh, good. I have
Age of 17.
yes, I have
Anyone
five
who's
credits.
like this next to
Five credits in boxes. Between them are distributed
I play, I record, I teach, I present.
One is for the track. So I'm going to quickly figure that out so that it's going to take them to give us tomorrow. And then it's like to go, that's not what I wanted today. So we also have 5 minutes in the program.
every minute, they come to
So
stop.
be on our way.
What is that?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Love sharing your passion and the knowledge and the man. I knew nothing about it.
I didn't know I wrote his music. I know I did.
Most people don't know.
No, the music is more time
Oh, right.
it would have taken
Yeah, it took him months to write the music.
Fantastic.
He spent entire years rewriting the music.
and being a perfectionist as well. Not a mere mortal.
So is the brother involved in all of this? You said his brother.
So yeah, his brother certainly helped him a lot in business. So he negotiated his contract.
Oh, important, okay.
He was a mafia, as he said. That's the only one that lasted.
Really?
Wow.
He finally got that right, eh?
Had been tried.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes, good luck to you all. See you. We have to see you.
Yeah.